Hello, I'm Kelly Hudson-Lewis. I'm a United Church minister in Hampton, New Brunswick, and I'm also the manager of spiritual care for our southern part of our hospital network, Horizon Health, in the St. John area in New Brunswick. And I'm going to be talking about meaning-making and rituals today. One of my favorite passages from the Bible is from Psalm 30. You turned my mourning into dancing. You've taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy. It's a passage that I share quite often in funeral services, and one that I believe can help us understand the importance of rituals and meaning-making as we cope with grief and loss. When a loss occurs, we grieve and we enter into a different way of being. Grief ensues when an important or meaningful attachment bond is damaged or severed in some way, and loss leaves a hole in us that must be filled over time. So meaning-making can help us find ways to fill that hole, to restore such holes, and aid us in going through the grieving process. Loss is a painful and difficult reality, and one that most people experience at some point in their life. But loss is not only related to death. People can experience loss in living relationships, such as abandonment, adverse childhood events, separation or divorce, loss of trust, loss of safety, loss of health, infertility. And people react differently to loss, and the effects might come and go, or last for months or years. Grief and mourning are common terms to describe feelings and behaviors following a loss. Although sometimes used interchangeably, grief and mourning represent different parts of loss. Grief is the normal process of reacting to a loss. It can be in response to a physical loss, such as death, or a social loss, including a relationship or a job. And mourning is the process by which people adapt to a loss. Mourning is greatly influenced by our cultural beliefs, our practices, and our rituals. Grief refers to the internal experiences of loss, the thoughts and feelings one experiences following a loss. And mourning is best described as acts or outward expressions of grief. Some common examples of mourning can include preparing for a funeral, wearing black, or sharing memories or stories about a loved one. These are parts of the mourning process that can be impacted by our cultural practices or rituals, and they can give structure to the grieving process. The process of mourning can help people to accept and emotionally process death or loss. It provides the actions to allow people to preserve memories of a loved one, and includes adapting and learning new ways to carry on without a person they care deeply about. So in this session, we'll look at rituals and meaning making, and it's important to recognize that these mourning practices actually help us process the emotions of grief. Engaging in the act of mourning can enable people to feel hopeful about living a happy and fulfilling life following their loss. It's human nature to desire a search for meaning and a longing for spiritual connection, especially after challenging losses. There is a need for us to make sense of our belief system, our worldview, our assumptions of how things are supposed to be. As a spiritual leader, this is often how I first connect with families, individuals, and even organizations or communities. Maybe a tragedy has shattered their understanding of people, and confusion and pain is overflowing. I've been privileged to join people of all ages and all religious, spiritual, or humanistic contexts in difficult journeys. Grief educator and researcher Robert Niemeyer suggests that meaning-making was an essential principle in grief and bereavement counseling, and he emphasizes that meaning-making in response to loss can be said to include the idea of sense-making, benefit-finding, and identity change. Sense-making is the process of finding an understanding regarding the loss, and benefit-finding is the creation of a meaning that helps people find positive perspectives resulting from the loss. Identity change is when the person coping with the loss is able to find a new sense of self or identity following the loss that has occurred in their life. I've been privileged to work with children during their times of loss. Children experience spiritual connections and meaning-making differently than adults. Their experiences of rituals and meaning-making can lead to the development of their own sense of identity. Children express their spirituality using 4 different styles: words, emotions, symbols, and actions. It's so important to help children feel empowered and their voices heard, so they can be facilitated and their voices can be facilitated to support the child's own individual spirituality as it emerges through their own means of expression. Storytelling, music, readings, symbolic offerings, and saying goodbye are important rituals, regardless of people's faith perspective. I try to remind families that doing something is vitally important for the grieving process. Mourning practices can allow expression to our grief in the words, emotions, symbols, and actions that we take on. Rituals or mourning practices that allow those who are grieving to tell their stories are beneficial as they aid in the reframing of the life story and can assist us in acknowledging and accepting the reality of loss. Rituals can aid in movement from a place of hurt and pain and deep sorrow to the place of hope and healing. One of the churches I served had an active community meal. And every Friday, those in the community needing a hot meal and warm conversations were served the tastiest soup in town. Every week there were 2 or 3 choices: turkey vegetable, hamburger, pea soup, moose soup, tomato vegetable, and of course chicken noodle. This project was started by a group of newly retired men, and they became the superstars of the congregation. This project grew and grew until additional help and space was needed. It created such an amazing desire for the community to help those who were homeless or street entrenched in the downtown core of our city. The work of the soup kitchen and the outreach center became such a central part of not only the congregation, but to our downtown neighborhood. This place became a space where bodies were fed, hearts were warmed by compassionate conversations, minds were enriched by learning experiences, and spirits were companioned as folks received advocacy for the challenges they were facing in housing, healthcare, and mental health support. So when one of the founders of the soup kitchen died, there was no doubt in his family's mind as to how they would honor his life. They would make soup. This was a family that was hesitant to have a funeral because while their grandfather had attended church each Sunday and sang in the choir and led the cooking of soup on a weekly basis, the family felt that they weren't so churchy, and maybe the best way for them to honor their grandfather was to make soup together in the soup kitchen. The family spent time in the church's kitchen preparing the soup, and they shared memories about Pop. The family had invited me, their Pop's minister, as well as the men who had gathered on Thursdays, to join them. The men from the church who were part of the choir sang songs while they prepped the meal and the space for the Friday meal, just as they did each Thursday, having been part of the choir practice the night before. The family had their pop's ashes in an urn in the center of everything, just as if Max was still directing the soup-making process. At the end of preparations, when the kitchen was warm and the smells were tantalizing, the men sang, "God be with you till we meet again." And I offered a blessing on Max's life and accommodation, a sending forth, as I would at a funeral. This ritual of recognizing and celebrating Max's life was truly a meaningful honoring of who he was in life and how his grandchildren and their children will remember him as they live their lives. This family continued the tradition. They started a soup club. Max had 12 adult grandchildren, and the family and friends of each grandchild gathered once a month to make batches of soup for 2 weeks at the soup kitchen. Meaning making and rituals are an essential part of the grieving process. They are one of the steps to moving through this most difficult time. Meaning making enables people to fulfill a need, or to find or create a sense of purpose or meaning in their lives. As a spiritual leader, I have journeyed with families who are living with loss, whether it was through a death, a parent being incarcerated, a foster child leaving the home and placed elsewhere, or going to live with members of their family. But this year, 2020 to 21, during the isolation of COVID-19, I think intentional meaning making has been essential for any loss, but especially the loss of our familiar activities and milestones that our children and youth in particular have missed. From drive-by birthday celebrations to drive-through graduations, meaning making and rituals have helped people engage in the loss experience and find ways to process the emotions of grief. Many have decided to postpone various rites and celebrations until after the pandemic, while others have found ways to move ahead in a new way. Through my 22 years as a congregational minister, being with people as they find ways to make meaning from difficult situations, tragedy, and loss, I know the power of rituals. At graveside funerals, I bring bubble soap and bubble wands so children and adults can breathe their goodbyes to their loved ones as a way to release a loved one's spirit into the universe. Teens have written messages on brightly colored Post-it notes and dropped those words into the earth to become one with their friend whose bright hair, bright personality, and always caring words surrounded them in difficult times. A friend of mine made a quilt during his partner's cancer treatments. All the material was made from scraps that had been used on various projects during their 10-year relationship. Another family gathered all of Nan's recipes and created a cookbook, Mom's Taste of Home, for each sibling and all the grandchildren. At Christmas, I saw a picture on Facebook of older grandchildren, youth, showing younger great-grandchildren how to make Nan's famous Christmas cookies. And a mom and a dad and 7-year-old twins gathered and made a family candle to honor their sadness that their baby sister was not born alive, but that she would always be a light in their family. Just last month, we heard Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, speak of his grandfather's legacy of service that inspired him to a life of service. You turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy. I have been privileged to witness the mourning practices, turning into rituals of healing and hope, I have seen families turn mourning into soup making, quilt creating, baking, candle decorating, and so many other ways that their hearts have begun to dance with joy in a new way. I want to show you some activities that you could use as meaning making. Creating a special candle, just a candle from the dollar store, and fabric paint. And you can make different designs. You might be able to glue pictures on the candle, maybe some special words that remind you of a loved one that you're celebrating, or a special occasion that you're missing and want to remember. A group that I worked with created this candle. These were called wiki sticks. It's just yarn wrapped in plastic that you can get at probably a toy store. And again, just putting words and symbols that had meaning to them to acknowledge a ritual of their being together in a time of sharing their emotions and the connections and bond that they formed. This is a beeswax candle. Again, this is a candle that a family made to honor a baby that was not born alive. That light would be shared in their life. Bubble making is my favorite, especially when we have outside burials, an opportunity to share words of hope, words of goodbye to loved ones that have died. It's a great opportunity for children in that what seems like a very grown-up adult ritual to have the time and the place in that service for their spirituality, their words, their voice to be heard. And an ukshuk to remind us of those who have been guides in our life, finding special rocks and holding them in our pockets. Maybe a touchstone, a way to remember someone special or something special. An opportunity to have children talk about their emotions. I use little packages of Skittles, the regular ones and the sour ones, and I put them together in a bowl. And when a child picks one, if it's sour, they can talk about emotions that make them unhappy, make them sad. But then the regular Skittles, they can speak of moments and memories of joy. And hugs and kisses, anytime that we're missing someone that we love. An opportunity to have a hug or a kiss can again bring that symbol of remembrance, of comfort to someone that is young. And those of us that aren't so young. And this is a cookbook of Nan's favorite recipes that children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren enjoy together. So I hope you find ways in working with your family to turn your mourning into times of remembrance, times of meaning-making, rituals that make sense for your family and for your children. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.